Hey guys, I'm Prodigy from Kilo23. It's wet, rainy, cold Washington. And today I've got the Genesis M4 from Echo 1. Today we're going to go inside of this gun and see why it is such a robust and cool little inexpensive gun. Great for beginners and basically a loaner gun. So let's go ahead and dive right into the gun. Alright, now in the review video I did talk about how most of the gun was polymer based. The major exception to that being the outer barrel, which is actually a two-piece metal barrel, so you get a big plus there. I also did note the two body pins were hex key screwed in, not just pop-out pins. It makes your body a little bit more sturdy. Something I actually found very interesting and kind of cool is that when you take the upper receiver off, you'll notice that the fake bolt in there does have a return spring on it, very similar to versions with a working bolt catch. Kind of a cool touch. At this point in disassembly, you'll notice we actually have the one-piece plastic hop-up and the pretty nice brass barrel out. So I'm going to take these apart and we'll check out the Mad Bull orange bucking that's actually in there. Now, one thing I did find about the hop-up is that the dial is actually pretty loose and so are the gears. You might want to put like a small O-ring or washer under this so it doesn't move around. It could actually decrease your hop-up while you're shooting. It's pretty loose in there. The crowning on the end of the barrel is actually pretty good as well. It goes in there about 6 millimeters, so about the length of a BB, and it's really well done considering. Now, the Mad Bull bucking does provide a decent amount of hop in there, probably enough for at least a 2.5 or 2.8, I'd imagine. I'm probably going to run this mostly with 2s or 2.5s if I take it out to the field. 0.2s because I'll be going to TAC pretty soon or running this indoor. And the barrel itself is actually a 6.06 bore. Not quite a tight bore barrel, but not exactly a standard bore either. The bucking actually has the letters MB on it, so that's kind of different. It is the Mad Bull orange bucking, so you get a pretty good air seal with it, and it's actually a pretty nice quality bucking as well. Now, the buffer tube itself is actually held on by this little guy, so it doesn't seem super strong. You may need to replace it, but if you're really good with your guns, I wouldn't worry about it. Now, the wiring out the back of the gun's a little bit different too. You do get the thicker gauge wiring along here, but it goes down to a slightly smaller gauge here, and you do have your connectors right here. So if you want to disconnect the back portion of your wiring assembly, you can do that. It makes it a little bit easier to work on your gun when it's disassembled. The motor itself is kind of a semi-Torx motor. Not a whole lot of torque in there, but enough to pull the spring in there that's getting around the 420 feet per second mark, which is quite a bit for a little gun like this. It's your standard gray body, nothing super special about the motor. It does have the cool little Echo 1 stickers on there. The gearbox itself is a little stiff to get out of the lower receiver. You really just end up having to pry it out of there. It's really not a huge deal though. You'll notice that on the left side of the gearbox here there's a little window, so if you want to put an Allen key or a small screwdriver in like this, you can actually trip your anti-reversal latch and decycle your gearbox. It's always a good thing to do before you actually open it up. Makes things a little bit easier. Now we can go and open up our gearbox. I always like to put a screwdriver or something into the spring guide and keep it pushed down a little bit. Sometimes these are pretty tight the first time you open them. You might need to put some mild pressure on places. Open it up, and we have our gearbox. Let's check it all out. Now the first thing you're probably going to notice about the gearbox is it's got a generous amount of grease in there. Really not too much and not too little. I've had gearboxes where I've opened them up and there's just no grease in there whatsoever. This one actually has a decent amount of grease, but not too much. It was kind of nice. There's grease in all the right places, piston rails, gears, gear teeth, a little bit on the axles, and some on the tappet plate. So all the moving parts in there have grease, which is a good thing. Now, before we actually move on to all the internals of the gearbox, I want to talk about the shell itself. This gearbox shell actually has more beef than a cow on it. The porting on the front here on the back is fantastically strong. Think like modified Taurus gearbox strong. It's a brick. So if you're able to break this thing, I will be very surprised. Now, one really big plus about this gearbox that I'm actually pretty surprised about, you do get some pretty nice 8mm bearings in here. These aren't like the cheap, cruddy bearings you'll find in really inexpensive guns. These are actually decent quality bearings. Now, being 8mm, if you want to swap them out for steel bushings or some really nice modified ceramic bushings, you can really do that easily. But you can see these are actually decently smooth bearings. This is a Prometheus old helical gear I have sitting here. And it doesn't have any shims under it or anything, but it actually spins pretty well. I'm quite happy. Alright, let's start with our spring and spring guide here. The spring guide is actually all steel and it has bearings on it. That's kind of a big plus there. These tend to cost about $15 aftermarket, so that saves you a little bit of money, and it's already in your gun, so it's going to last longer right there. Plus you got the bearings here that puts a little bit extra pressure on the spring, so it kind of equates for a little bit more FPS. See, the spring here is a non-linear. It's advertised as an M110 spring, but I feel like we're getting more of an M120 speed out of it. So a little bit of a boost there as far as FPS. But I'm probably going to swap the spring out. I'm going to be running this more indoor, I think. So I'll probably put a lower pressure spring in there. The spring is also slightly shorter than a standard AEG spring, just by a little over ½ an inch there, not too much though. Now let's start talking about your air pressure system here. Your tappet plate is going to be pretty proprietary. It's very similar to the modified Taurus. You got your sections cut off here. That's going to be for the reinforcement near the gearbox shell. So standard tappet plates will be compatible with this. You just need to cut this down a little bit. It doesn't take a whole lot of work. You can use a Dremel, or I'm probably going to use, if I have to replace this later on, probably a metal file and just sand it down along here. It shouldn't take more than a few minutes probably. Our air nozzle is just a standard plastic air nozzle. It does not have an O-ring inside of it or anything. Our cylinder is a Type 0. It's got a chromium finish on it, and it has no ports in there. So M4 length barrel with a Type 0 cylinder. Seems like we're getting a pretty surprisingly high FPS out of that setup. Cylinder head, standard plastic, one O-ring, has a surprisingly soft damper on here, so that's good. And finally our piston and piston head. Single O-ring, one metal tooth, second to last tooth is not removed. I've been running, I probably ran about 1,000 rounds through this gun so far without problems, and it's holding up pretty well. I haven't really had any wear on any of the parts or anything. Now our gears here are actually pretty strong. They seem like pretty good quality steel. You notice you do have a slightly enlarged sector delayer here, not too large, but every little bit helps, I suppose. Now the gun is advertised to be able to run on a LiPo battery. I feel like these gears are actually going to hold up for quite a while running a LiPo. Now something I'm actually quite impressed about is the trigger contacts on here. They actually make very good contact with the trigger shuttle. So if you want to run a LiPo on this, by all means, you're getting great contact on there. You shouldn't have a problem for a while. Now as far as upgrades go, this gun, every gun can probably use an upgrade or two. Even the brand new super fancy gun you just bought that was $400 or $500, you can always do some tuning, some upgrades, things like that. This gun, first I would probably start with some basic tuning, things like that, maybe a little bit of cleanup of some of the excess grease, minor things like that. Aside from that, not a whole lot. You can always put a bearing piston head in here, that's a definite plus. Maybe put a cylinder in here that has a port so it matches the barrel length. You might lose a little bit of FPS, then again you might gain some. It's really hard to tell without actually trying it out. Cylinder head, you can always put an aluminum one in here, but this one's running just fine it seems like. Aside from that, not a whole lot. I'm probably personally going to drop a softer spring in here. Get it shooting somewhere between like 290 and 300 I'm hoping for. That way I can run it at an indoor field. I'm going to try it out soon. And that'll be a heck of a lot of fun. This little guy in there tearing people up. People are going to hate me. Aside from that, there's not a whole lot you really need to do to this gun. Nothing you need to do actually. It's all just a matter of what you want to do. So it's totally up to you guys. Alright, what did you guys think of the Genesis M4 by Echo 1? The internals are actually pretty decent. $130 gun, you get a great deal. Thanks for watching guys, I'm Prodigy from Kilo23. Stay tuned, we've always got more on the way. Take it easy.